Hi there. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar being recorded specifically for the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools by my organization, which is called Board on Track, and my name is Mike Mazzoni, Board on Track's Director of Leadership and Governance Training. What is Board on Track? Board on Track is an organization that supports hundreds of charter school boards across the country, and supports thousands of schools nationwide in their efforts to improve their board so that their board over time develops and can support the organization's drive towards its vision of excellence. This first presentation we're going to give here today is designed to give you an understanding of the founding charter school board. That's why it's titled, Congrats, You're Chartered, but now what? At Board on Track, we find that many of the boards that we work with, when they're starting out, they don't have a ton of expertise in what a new charter school board ought to be doing. Oftentimes, charter schools are founded by individuals who've never dealt with the board before, or the new leader might be a principal, someone who's an expert in that area, and doesn't have a lot of work with charter school boards. So the goal of this presentation is going to help you understand whether you've got an existing board that's relatively new, or if you're starting out with a founding board from the get-go. We want this presentation to give you an idea of what the ideal governing board structure should look like, what the types of things those boards should be focused on, and then we want you to be able to reflect on, like I said, whether you've got a current board, some things, whether they're structural or systematic, that you should change, and if you're developing your founding board, what that board's going to look like and do right from the beginning. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it. So you're probably wondering, we hear this a lot, your new charter school board, should you really even be focusing on board development right now? You've got so many things going on with finding your facilities, getting your school up and running, getting your enrollment in. You got teachers, parents, staff to worry about. What we like to say, though, is that it is important to get this stuff right from the beginning, because of the rest of your structure of your organization is going to depend on having really strong governance from the top. It takes a long time to develop a great board, so we encourage people to start right from, like I said, right from the get-go. A real emphasis that we put here on Board on Track is that developing a strong board and being a good board and good board member is a little bit like a physical training. It's something that you get better at over time. So the earlier that you start with an intentional focus on getting it right, the better. So it's really important to note that like any organization, charter schools and their board should develop and evolve over time. So what we find is that the organization grows. It's important that the governing board grows and changes alongside with it. If you look over here, this is the path to excellence, or a capability maturity model. Some of you may have heard that term before. It's basically a way of documenting and understanding how boards evolve and develop over time. So as you can see here, many founding boards, or even just basic boards that have been around for a long time, they tend to be very reactive. They rely on what we call heroics, or the red cape. So they get by because there's usually a couple champions on the board who are rolling up their sleeves and kicking the ball forward. We see here down here that the boards tend to be more reactive and less strategic, so they're spending most of their time discussing the here and now rather than planning for the future. That's totally normal at the beginning, but the goal here is definitely to get to a point where the board is spending most of its time being strategic and less of its time being reactive. Why is this important? Because risk lives in this type of environment down here where the board is very reactive. So our goal is going to help you and your team very methodically develop and improve up this ladder to being an excellent governing board, which has really optimized its ability to achieve its mission. It has sustained outstanding results for the organization. It has really strong, sustainable processes, and has the ability to live into perpetuity. So this is something that we'll refer to often, but again, our goal is to say that regardless of where your board is right now, it's important to kick off with an understanding that the board is going to develop over time. So when we look at what makes a good board and in what areas boards develop over time, The three big areas are what we call the 3 Ps. They are the people, the process, and the performance. When you get those 3 things right, you got a really strong board. When we talk about people, we're talking about getting the right team together. So that is the individual players, having a strong board and a strong CEO partnership, and having an engaged board that holds itself accountable. You've got the process, which is doing things the right way. So it's sustainable board operations, focusing on your meetings that don't last longer than 2 hours, having agendas that are put together very strategically and are tied to goals, planning out your annual board meeting calendar in such a way that you have enough time to actually dive into the really important strategic issues that boards need to deal with. And lastly is the performance, which is focusing on the right work. So here, this is focusing on results, focusing on meeting and exceeding your charter promises. We do this by way of setting some really clear goals that are tied to your charter and really focus on what the board's going to be doing and what your CEO is going to be doing to achieve your charter school's vision of excellence. I'd like to put this quote up here in green that you might have seen before. It says, "Greatness is not a function of circumstance. Greatness, it turns out, is largely a matter of conscious choice and discipline." We put this up here because, like I said a moment ago, that we really see that this board governance work is something that you're not born with talents in this area, but when you stick to it and focus on improving it, just like any other activity, whether it's you hiring a personal trainer, you can actually get better, noticeably better at doing these types of things. And to the extent that they can become a habit, they become more repeatable. So when we talk about the right people and we talk about the right team, like I said, we break this out into having the board CEO partnership and the engaged and accountable board. So when we talk about having a strong board CEO partnership, it's important to know that what does this look like? So when you're getting your board together, or you've got a board and you're trying to strengthen it and really smash it out of the park in the year ahead, really important that you've got this board CEO partnership and you've got it done well. So what does that look like? Well, the partnership is built on mutual trust and respect. That may go without saying, but you would be surprised how many boards assume that without actually having a conversation about what that looks like. So it's important that the board understands its role, there's clarity about how the partnership will deliver outcomes, and there's clear communication. So when we talk about clear communication, it can be communication protocols, who's talking to whom and when, but also things like making sure that there's alignment on strategic priorities, making sure that there's alignment on the mission, we're all charging forward in the same direction, and that there's an open ability for one another to provide constructive feedback to each other. We'll go into more detail about that. When we talk about an engaged and accountable board, we talk about having an engaged team. So having a board structure in place that allows there to be an engaged team. When we talk about an engaged team, we don't just talk about the individual board members, but we talk about having clear roles and responsibilities for the full board, for officers, for committees, the individual board members, and the staff included in that. You want to make sure that your team is strategically assembled. I want you to pause for a moment and think about your own board, either in existence or what you're planning. And think to yourself, is this board, has this been strategically assembled with the skills, temperament, and time to govern a multi-million-dollar business? Or did this board come about because we found people who were just, volunteers, warm bodies who liked what we were doing and wanted to get on board? It's important to note that that's how a lot of boards are founded. We want to challenge you to think beyond just the convenience of that and think, well, what is really going to be the best for our organization? Because when we say that, often we see some a realization go across people's minds when we say that you are on the board of directors of a multi-million-dollar business or organization. So it's really important. We want to make sure that we're bringing people in strategically so that they're serving a specific purpose on our board. You want to make sure you have clear, measurable accountability for each board member so they understand what their roles and responsibilities are, and others can hold them accountable to those expectations. Succession planning is something that most boards do not get right, but it is absolutely critical. Making sure that you've got the win the lottery plan. So if you're a school leader or a board chair or another leader suddenly is no longer participating in board work, who's going to be able to pick up the pieces of that and move forward? So succession planning is very important in this area. We used to call it the hit by the bus plan, but we've been asked to change that to something more positive, because hitting by the bus is not really a positive thing, so we've changed it to the win the lottery plan. So give some reflection to what would happen to your organization if somebody won the lottery or otherwise was unable to continue doing their work tomorrow. How would the organization respond? All right, so when we talk about process, like I said, we're talking about strategic and efficient meetings that don't last more than 2 hours, and happy to work with boards who we have some boards that we talk to that their board meetings last 4 to 6 hours, and there's usually some very common problems that lead to that when we talk to boards. So if you happen to be one of those boards, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to talk about why that is and help you navigate some strategies to speeding up those meetings, making them more effective and efficient. And without jumping ahead, the reason why that is so important is because when you're getting your board together and we talk about succession plans, it's important that we have our really strong contributing board members stay on our team. We don't want them to get burnt out and to leave. So by having meetings that are really focused and strategic allows really great board work to get done in a sustainable way. When we talk about performance, like I said, we're talking about focusing on results, focusing on meeting and exceeding those charter promises that you've now just had approved. We want to remember that the charter is what allows your organization to exist. It is the legal contract between you as the board and your authorizer. So it's really important that you're laser focused on delivering on the promises that you've made there. So we do that by making sure that the board and the CEO are very clear on where they are on their path to excellence, and that they've got articulated and measurable goals that are helping to get the organization closer and closer in that direction. When we have goals established, highly recommend that your team actually goes ahead and takes those goals and make sure that you put them into a dashboard. So if you're a member of Board on Track, you'll note that we've got our goal project mapping software tool, which allows you to input your goals and be able to track them throughout the year. If you don't use something like that, the best way to do it would be to create a chart. And I think I have an example that I can show you. But if you just take a grid and you outline what the goal is, who's responsible for it, what the deliverables are, and what the dates are for the due dates for those things, we then recommend that people actually fire these things up at every one of their board meetings so they can get in alignment with each other on where they're making progress and what needs some more support. Each trustee should understand and complete executable tasks. So no board member should what we like to point out is that no board member should be the red cape, right? We don't want to see boards where there's one person who all of the board responsibility is resting on their heads and their shoulders. We want each trustee to have delegated tasks that then they can go back and accomplish, and like I said, be held accountable to. So talking about getting the team right from the beginning, what is the right size for our charter school board? I'd like to think that it's, when we talk to people, we find that it's bigger than most people think. So we are going to get into this more, but the optimal number down here, as you'll see, is 11 to 15 board members. How do we arrive at this number? Don't faint on me if you heard that and you're not quite at something like that size. Let's talk about first why we came up with this number, and then we'll talk about how we get there. So if you've got 5, we recommend, and we'll get into this more, that a strong governing board needs to have 5 committees. They are the governance committee, finance committee, development or fundraising committee, the academic excellence committee, and the CEO support and evaluation committee. Depending on your board and where it is in its specific journey or your organization, you might even have some additional task forces. I would challenge you on whether those are needed, but it's possible. When you've got all those committees, we recommend having a minimum of 3 people on each committee. Why is this? It's because committees are really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to board work. The committees are going to be the ones who are doing the brunt of the work, and we need to make sure that there's adequate hands on deck, so to speak, available at that committee to get all of that great work done. We find that having 3 people is the minimum size that allows for that great work to be done. And then lastly, going back to that issue about preventing burnout of really good board members, we really recommend that trustees only serve on one committee to the extent that that's possible. Serving on more than one committee can cause that individual to be spread too thin, and we often see that that leads to burnout. So when we talk about that 3 people per committee, at least 5 committees, we get somewhere in the realm of 11 to 15 board members. So how do we do this? Don't be alarmed if you are a founding board or organization that's just opened and you don't have quite that size of a board. This is all part of that methodical process of moving up the path to excellence or capability and maturity model to becoming a more governing, strategic, sustainable board. So at the very minimum, as a founding board, you should have at least 5 board members. Never see anything fewer than 5 board members. 5 to 7 would be okay. At a very minimum, I like to see 7 board members because that is usually the appropriate number to have sufficient diversity and background skills, expertise that's needed to get this organization up and running. As part of your board development plan for the next several years, whether you've an organization that's been around for 5 or 10 years, or if, like we said, you are just got your charter and you're starting off, it's really important to have a plan for the mountaintop in the distance that you're headed for. What is the ideal board structure and composition? Is it 11 to 15? Are we going to stop at 9? Whatever that is, you want to have it identified. And then you want to have a methodical recruitment plan to, like I said before, strategically assemble the team that you want and need. A little recommendation that we make here when we talk about getting up to this number and making these numbers work, one of the best recommendations that I can make for helping your board with the committee work and getting to a minimum of 3 people. It's not a tip that's included in this slide deck, but what I want to point out to you is that lots of boards who do really strong governing work bring in what we call non-voting, non-board member volunteers to serve alongside them on their committees. So what would this look like? This would mean you've got your full roster of full voting board members, but there's nothing usually stopping having somebody who's really passionate about your mission, but for one reason or another either can't or does not want to serve on your board. Think about asking that person to participate on a committee as a non-voting board member. They can participate in all the deliberations. They can take on the workload. The only thing that they cannot do is the actual voting in the board meetings themselves. And that's usually not a problem. So this is a totally underutilized tactic out there that we love to see. So whether you've got a busy parent who loves your mission, whether you've got a local elected official who really is aligned with your mission, maybe a big philanthropist, business leader, who for one reason or another can't or doesn't want to serve on the board as a formal full voting member, and there are lots of reasons why that could be, consider bringing them in as a non-voting volunteer. So when we talk about the types of people that we want on our board, when we talk about bringing in a strategically assembled board, we're going to be talking about 2 things. We're going to be talking about actual skills and experiences and expertise, like those on this slide. And we're going to be talking about some of those more soft skills, the characteristics, behavioral type things that we like to see. So when we talk about here, there's some very obvious ones: finance, education, previous governance experience. These are the types of things we want on our board. So when you're out there recruiting people, you want to be very methodical to say, we need people with these backgrounds and skills. We don't want a board made up of all of these people, and it's important to know what their role is. So for example, with legal, it's highly recommended, critical to have at least an attorney, at least one attorney on your board. We highly recommend that. It's important to note that that attorney is not the legal counsel for the board or for the organization. Rather, that person, the benefit of having that person on there is because their legal training and expertise gives them a different way of thinking about things. They can also be very valuable when it comes to things such as raising red flags about when it's appropriate and needed to go out and reach out to outside counsel. So having that person on there is very important. Financial, facilities, people who have experience with real estate acquisitions and construction. We like to point out that with education, it's really important that you have somebody on your board, potentially even multiple people, who come from an academic background and really understand the intricacies of learning, different learning styles, pedagogy, what the types of reporting and data looks like related to this. Like to point out, though, that you do not want to have a board made up totally of educators. Why is this? The beauty of the board governance system that we have for our nonprofit boards and charter school boards is that you have lay people who are able to bring in different perspectives and partner with somebody with the academic experience that's on the CEO's side. Really, the value is having people with different inputs and perspectives running the board itself. And then previous governance experience, like I said, is one of these areas that typically people do not recruit for, and they don't ask, have you served on a board before, that type of thing. So like I said, we want those skill sets, but we're not going to stop there. We really want a totally well-rounded board. So that includes not just professional expertise, but some of these soft skills as well as diversity considerations. So some soft skills that people don't often think about. An entrepreneurial mindset. Your organization is inherently entrepreneurial. Somebody had the brilliant idea to pull a school out of the sky and actually create it. So having somebody who has that kind of entrepreneurial spirit is really important. Things like having a sense of humor. Serving on a charter school board is one of these rare areas where you actually get to select who your coworkers are going to be. So having somebody with a sense of humor, someone who has passion and alignment for your mission. Time is really important. Make sure that they actually have the time to dedicate to the workload that's going to be required. Like I said, with diversity considerations, you want your board members to reflect, your membership that is, to reflect the wider tax base that is supporting the organization, as well as the population that they're serving. So you want to think about what kind of students are attending our school, what neighborhoods are we serving, and like I said, the community as a whole, the broader tax base. You want this, the board to sufficiently reflect all of these different things. So consider things like ethnicity, gender, age, geography of where they're living and or where they're from, socioeconomic status as well. Question we always get is, what about the role of stakeholders on the board? So when we talk about stakeholders, we talk about parents, teachers, students. There might be some others. The key here is to proceed with caution. Why do I say that? I say that because the key to effective governance is a certain degree or level of objectivity. And it's really important that if you either are required to, say, have a parent on your board, or you have decided definitively as a board that you're going to move forward with that, there are some inherent challenges that are not insurmountable, but it's important that you understand that they're there and you plan for them accordingly. So while my recommendation is that you try to avoid having the stakeholders on the board themselves, if you do decide to move forward with them, you must proceed with caution. The reason why I say that it's better in a lot of instances to steer away from having these stakeholders on the board is because having a formal vote is a little bit like icing on the cake. Because with a strong organization, there should be very formal and robust methods of soliciting input from parents, teachers, and students. And when done correctly, that complements the board's work, and the need to have an actual formal vote is not there. And you don't run the risk of, like I said, missing the level of objectivity that's required. So one of the important things to do, especially early on in your organization, is as you're recruiting members and you're putting together your team, it's critical, like I've said before, to have very clear understanding of roles and responsibilities. So as part of your leadership team, ideally, it is the governance committee that would work on this and ensure that all of these things exist. But you want to have a job description for the full board. What is our job as a board? What are we trying to do, and how are we going to be held accountable to that? Individual board members. You want a board member job description that says, here is what an individual board member does here, including serving on committees and attending monthly board meetings and doing work in between and attending events and whatever those things may be. You want it to be very clear up front that when board members join, they understand what they're getting themselves into. And this is a great tool to use when you're out recruiting new board members to treat it like a true part-time job and have a job description available. Really important to note here that we do not want you to go out and reinvent the wheel with any of these things. At www.boardontrack.com, we've got samples for you that you can download and just make some tweaks to make them your own, or totally start from scratch. Important thing here is that you know that there are resources out there and available for you. So like I said, visit our website. You can feel free to download all of our job descriptions and make them your own. So when we talk about structuring our board for success, I'm going to go through this slide a little bit quickly because I think that this is a little bit more foundational knowledge that most people know. You got to make sure you've got 4 officers in place. They are the chair, vice chair, treasurer, and secretary. Please go through here and understand what the role is of all of these individuals and what some really great characteristics look like for these individuals. And consider these things when you're putting together your board and electing your officers. Like I said, here are those 4 officer positions. Next, when we get into the board committee. So like I said, one of the things you've got to get right if you're going to have a very successful board and organization is the committees and the committee structure. Because like I said, committees are where the real brunt of the work is going to get done. The meat and potatoes of the work happens in committees. So it's important also that you want to make sure that your board is, that you want to make sure that your board is structured to answer some questions. Go through these as well, and as you're putting together your board and you're putting together your committee structure, think about, can you answer these questions today? And if not, the board that you're putting together and the vision that you see for your board, will you be able to answer these in the future? You need to be able to, as an individual board member, should be able to answer these questions and to know where the answers to them live. So which standing committees can boards not live without? Mentioned them to you a minute ago. They are the finance, governance, academic excellence, development or fundraising, and CEO support and evaluation. So let's go through these each. Finance committee. The key tasks of the finance committee are to work with the CEO to develop the budget, an annual budget that prioritizes that vision of excellence. So again, keeping a laser focus on meeting, exceeding charter promises. They monitor the organization's financial health over the year. And to the extent that there are strategic issues that need to be addressed by the full board, they package those together and elevate those to the full board. They also educate the full board on what it looks like to conduct proper oversight of the financials of the organization. Why is this? It's because one of the common misconceptions is that this committee is totally on the hook for all financial oversight. Again, it's important to point out that as a governing board, you are the board members are legally responsible for the organization. They are what are known as legal fiduciaries of the organization. That's a whole another presentation, but what's important to point out is that no individual board member has any more or less power and responsibilities for the organization. So each individual board member is on the hook for the financials, whether or not they're on the finance committee. So it's important to see the finance committee, if it's typically chaired by the treasurer, typically is somebody who has financial expertise, is an accountant, CPA, financial planner, a bookkeeper, whatever it is. who has an understanding of proper financial oversight. It's important for that person in the committee to support their fellow board members in understanding what it is that they need to pay attention to and when. So it is a common misconception that we've got a great finance committee, so I don't even have to think about the budget. That's not true. It's important for every board member to have an understanding of what the financial health is looking like. Moving over to the governance committee. Key task here is to take care of the overall health of the board. So what does that mean? It means board education, conducting an annual self-evaluation, running the board retreats, making sure that those job descriptions we were just talking about are updated annually. Things that indicate the health of the organization itself, finding, recruiting, and nominating, orienting board members. They're going to be the committee that's responsible primarily for deciding what type of board members we need and determining the plan to recruit them. Also, the succession planning we talked about, the win the lottery plan, also something that would fall into the bucket here of the governance committee, again, because it's designed to improving the internal functions and sustainability of the board. Common misconception here is that this committee somehow writes all of the policies. That's not true. It's also more than just being a nominating committee, which is what we hear often. Again, it's the broader overall health of the organization and the board. Key tasks here of the Academic Excellence Committee, very similar, as you'll see, to the finance committee, and we'll see that in a second. So they are going to, just like the finance committee develops the annual budget with the CEO, the Academic Excellence Committee is going to develop organizational goals and priorities for achieving the vision of academic excellence. This should be something that's clearly defined. What is our vision of excellence? These things, again, are going to be pulled or directly related to the charter promises themselves. Similarly, it's the responsibility of the Academic Excellence Committee to educate the full board as to what proper oversight of the academics looks like. We hear that oftentimes from, say, somebody without educational backgrounds. They ask, we get these test scores in, but, how do I really know what I'm looking for? And what are the red flags and things like that? You really rely on the Academic Excellence Committee, hopefully that's chaired or staffed with some real people with robust backgrounds and skills in this area to help educate the rest of the board. Important to note, like I said before, that you do not want this Academic Excellence Committee to be staffed up entirely of educators. Again, having that diversity of opinion and background is really critical. So 1 or 2 would be ideal, and then you want to round it out with other board members. Another common misconception down here is that once the vision of excellence has been established, that this committee is really the team that determines the means to get and achieve that vision of excellence. This is something that we'll save for a different presentation. This gets to what we call the governance management line in what the role is of the board versus what the role is of the CEO and his or her team. This is one of those areas where there's really good overlap here. The academic excellence team is going to look into oversight and setting that vision of excellence. And then the CEO and his or her team, they're going to go out and execute on that vision and develop the means to the ends. All right, so this slide here, I'll let you take a look at it on your own. This is special focus on the Academic Excellence Committee and how it compares to the Finance Committee. So walk through here, you'll get a better understanding of the overlap and the crosswalk between the Academic Excellence Committee and the Finance Committee. So thank you so much for watching this webinar. I am going to pause here and allow you to go through the rest of the presentation on your own. The rest of the presentation is going to focus on some big areas and what to focus on and what some of the common mistakes are. So again, thank you so much. If there are any questions you have about what we covered so far today, I want you to reach out to us as soon as you can. We'd love to answer questions and help to clarify these things. So thanks so much and good luck.